Welcome back, everyone, to Behind the Shield. So, for those who don't know, we're on our 8th episode already. So, I guess time flies when you're having fun. My name is Marco Estrella, and I'll be your host today. On today's show, we have some hot topics from the last few weeks. We have an abnormal guest speaker, and this abnormal guest brought his own guest to the party. So, the more the merrier, I guess. Can't wait to hear what they have to talk about. If this is your first time joining our podcast, Behind the Shield is not a sales pitch. We're just here to talk about cybersecurity issues that concern us all. And hopefully in the next 60 minutes, we want to inform and entertain you so that you become a regular listener and come back on the regular. You can find additional information on the show's webpage, virtualguardian.com/event. You can register for future events and listen to past podcasts, previous episodes. Our show is pretty much everywhere now. iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. So it's pretty easy to find. Hopefully you enjoy the content and you can listen to those as well. The show's agenda is quite simple. We always start with a 30-minute current events. We call it the Hot Topic segment. And it's followed by a 15-minute spotlight talk. Which will stretch a little bit today because we have a special extra guest. And we close out the show with audience participation questions. So don't hesitate to submit questions in the Zoom chat. And we're going to try to get to them. I always try to get through all of them, but sometimes there's too many. But we always have a look there towards the end. Okay, so enough housekeeping. Let's jump into our Hot Topic segment. And today's cybersecurity professionals on the panel are Patrick Naum, Virtual Guardian CEO. Patrick helps customers with solutions on how to defend themselves against all manner of cyber threats.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We also have Navilogic co-founder Bob Bennett. Having been CISO for many organizations, Bob brings many years of governance, risk, and compliance to the table. Hi, Bob.
Good afternoon. Great to be here again, Marco.
Excellent. We also have today's spotlight speaker on the panel, Mike Britton. Mike is CISO for Abnormal Security, an email security company that uses behavioral artificial intelligence to prevent business email compromise, supply chain fraud, and other social engineered attacks. Hi, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Marco.
And for the first time in our podcast history, our guest speaker brought his own guest speaker. We have Joel Godbout. He is cybersecurity manager for PCL Construction. I'll let Mike introduce Joel more officially later on the show. Hi, Joel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. They're going to be talking about, Joel and Mike will be talking about securing your cloud email platform from social engineered attacks in about 30 minutes. So that's going to be pretty good. Stick around for that. So let's get started with our first hot topic, shall we? And we're going to start at put your names in a hat. And Patrick, you're up. We have a mortgage broker that leaked close to 750,000 customers' accounts because of something pretty avoidable. Patrick, please tell our listeners what happened exactly.
Thanks, Marco. I was mentioning in the pre-show, it's very hard to choose stories. There's unfortunately many of them that go on every day, and we usually choose the ones that are more recent. So this one goes back to February 2nd of this year, of course. The reason why I took it is because it really addresses everything that, could potentially happen or go wrong within organizations. It talks about, lack of proper communications, disclosure, governance, lack of controls. I would also add lack of empathy or understanding of the business impact of some of those leaks or data leaks. So it's a Canadian mortgage brokerage firm that's called 812 Financial Technologies. And as you mentioned, they leaked, obviously, I'll tell you how, 750,000 of records, having with PII information. And also financial information, right? It's not just about PII. It's also people's credit ratings, information. You also have, if you take a closer look, in a lot of these cases, it's literally people's financial health. So what happened was that they were actually alerted by an organization called And I don't know these guys, were in the business of doing this, but they're called Website Planet. So Jeffrey Fowler was the one. So they scan, organizations and do good by, highlighting threats and vulnerabilities. So they called the company and they noticed that one of their databases was actually open on the internet through an AWS instance. So they notified the organization very quickly, and the organization was able to correct the mistake after. But what's interesting here is that you see the article I read from February 2nd, and you contrast that to the official press release of the company. And I highlighted a few things on the press release. They say some things like, a vulnerability was identified during a routine database upgrade. Then you see our network operations team promptly discovered and secured the open port and non-password protected database that may have contained PII. So you know that lawyers wrote this, right? Typically, because nothing is clear, and it really goes against, actually they even interviewed the CIO, and he said it was a migration of a database instance. He admitted to everything that actually went down, and then you see the official report. Now, unfortunately, in Canada, our privacy laws are outdated. They're trying very hard to introduce new bills. They haven't been introduced yet, except for Quebec. Here you probably heard of Bill 25 or Law 25, which is mapped to GDPR. So it's actually, that legislation is in place to prevent such things, right? And if you look at, what Equifax reports, there's 15,000 to 24,000 suspicious mortgage applications every month. So you may not have a social and security number in that database, and they did not, but you could infer it and use the information you have to launch a social engineering attack and obtain any information to compromise or in person people to get new loans or even to change the deeds on houses, and it's been done before. So it's a complete lack of responsibility. Communications were inefficient. Clearly, they did not have an incident response plan. So you look at that and it's a case in point of what not to do. Also, from an IR governance perspective is one thing, but then you look at technically, right? What we see in the market today is there's a lot of companies that are rushing to the cloud, that are digitally transforming, and it introduces so many blind spots. And this is an example. You got a sysadmin. He probably didn't have the knowledge to do what he was doing, probably not enough tools and certainly not enough planning, and literally took a database and instantiated and migrated it on AWS without proper MFA and proper encryption and security. So this is the tip of the iceberg, because as the gentleman from Website Planet said, you consistently find databases that are completely open on the internet when they do the research, because they are a research organization. So again, security is always an afterthought. It's not thought of initially at the design phase, and this is the end result. And then people like I'll tell you, we all have these stories. My sister-in-law had her identity stolen last year. It took a year to fix everything, and the amount of time and effort involved is crazy. So, and look at Desjardins, it happened up here in Quebec, and actually Law 25 was one of the things that prompted the adoption of the law is what happened with Desjardins, where pretty much all Quebecers, millions of customers of Desjardins got their information leaked the same way. And there were tons of people with identity theft and whatnot. So it's just feeding the identity theft machine, and it's a complete lack of responsibility and governance, and it's exposed out here in the public. You can't hide from this, right? So that's what I wanted to highlight. And obviously there's a lot of best practices and that are easily addressable by organizations.
Yeah, I like in the article, they say after the event, the CIO says, we have since the incident put in a number of additional controls in the last 4 weeks above what we do to be as proactive as possible.
Yeah.
Right. To be as proactive. We after the incident, we've added things. So I thought that was quite funny.
He even says things are going too fast.
Why does it always take an incident for us to change in certain organizations? Why is that? And how much can that change and be proactive from a reactive stance?
Yeah.
Well, that's why legislation is there, right? Because people don't take responsibility. Because if if you have a proper, governance and you have a clean organization that's responsible, you shouldn't be in these situations. You put at least minimal controls in place.
Well, I think that was the idea in the US as well, to make executives responsible, right? We keep pushing everything up to the board of directors, but do they really have personal responsibility to have that oversight? Have we closed that gap enough? I think that's still a challenge. Who's accountable?
Yeah.
And how much does it cost an organization?
Absolutely. Bruce Schneier wrote a blog, and I reread it because it came out in 2021. It was, the title of it was, "When Will We Take Cybersecurity Seriously?" And it was a very detailed, and the comments, the people who commented on the blog and the reasons, it's not painful enough. It's not, so the weight of doing something before and the pain of it, it's not painful enough. So that's why Law 25, is putting financial penalties, but we'll see. Time will tell if that's going to be sufficient.
I think there's been enough financial penalties on organizations, because it not only costs you and your reputation and cost to do monitoring for people and everything else, but think of the disruption of time of your employees. It already costs them, but they still don't do it. It's interesting.
Thank you, Patrick, for that. That was good. And Bob, seeing as you seem to be red hot, ready to go, you're number 2. So Bob, you have you looked at a hack, a cyber attack actually suffered by Reddit. So can you tell us what happened, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Say thanks, Marco. I'm coming up with these, and I think looking at Patrick, you said it before we got on this call today, is there is so much going on out there. How do we pick what's actually, what do we talk about? Because there's so much going on. It's pretty incredible. So I think today's going to be a good show, but let's talk about Reddit quick. There was a user compromised through a phish, an internal Reddit employee late on the 5th of February. And so they were phished, they entered their credentials, and eventually then gave those up. And the person who got those credentials and the second factor token for that individual was able to get into some of Reddit's internal systems, including, they said, internal documents, code. I'll come back to that in a minute, as well as some internal dashboards and business systems. So none of the systems, or at least none of them primarily used to run the Reddit platform, but nonetheless, very interesting because it had employees' information, other companies' contacts, and advertising information within it. So what's interesting is we all know when an employee's credentials get compromised, can we detect that? And if it's current authentication, how do we know, unless we have adaptive authentication or something else, to say, hey, wait a minute, you just got logged in from the East Coast, but now you're in the West Coast, 10 minutes later. How did that happen at the same time? How do you know that something is actually happening along those lines, especially with two-factor credentials as well? So I think it's interesting because that could have gone on for a lot longer. But what stopped it? And this is what I find interesting about this story, and one angle of it, and that is they have a culture at Reddit that's very open and encourage the employees to collaborate. And this employee self-reported. No penalties, came forward very quickly and said, hey, I think I did something wrong here. Not penalized for it. When you create a culture that way internally at your organization to say, hey, we're all in this together, and if you do something, we need to respond quickly. I think this is a great example of where, as an organization, we can do things to make sure that when something happens, and it will, that we respond very quickly. And I think that probably has a lot to do with limiting the damage at Reddit in this case. Now, side point, something interesting in this is they referenced another hack that happened late in January, a similar attack used to breach Riot Games. They got code again in that case, but that code was actually for League of Legends multiplayer online battle arena. And so it was interesting, while no details were really shared about that they talked about it there. And so what happened? Well, you have that code and it completely disrupted the updates to that game at Riot Games as well. And now it goes further because there was actually a $10 million ransom. Say, we're going to release our code if you don't pay us $10 million. And that was in a hacker form, but they didn't give that up. So you have to think, if a similar thing happens, do I stop it quick enough? Or how am I going to, number one, detect something like that? And number two, detect that lateral movement to make sure I'm shutting things down quick enough. So I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the social aspect of being phished, because we all know they're getting better. And so we have to think about those mitigating factors, as always, and test them and have a culture where we can respond. So I think it was an interesting example and reference to Riot Games as well.
With 3 decades of experience, expertise, and success in secure digital transformation, ESI offers employees an innovative environment in which to succeed. Visit esitechnologies.com and click on Join the Team to learn more about opportunities across North America.
It blows my mind. I know that the fish here got the credentials by impersonating an intranet site. It blows my mind here, even when we do it here at Virtual Guardian, how good the guys. It's actually pretty easy now to impersonate sites. Plus, the guys are very good, so you just fall for it. Panel, any comments on this story? Anything to add on Bob's story?
Yeah, I would say similar to the first story where it talked about how they publicized it. It was very wrapped in legalese. I think Reddit did a really good job on their communication to the public as well. I think they did. They were very clear. It didn't sound like it was written by a lawyer. It was very plain in what they did and how they handled it. And I think that's a good example out of this too. I think the reporting obviously helped them, but also you have one opportunity to get that first message out as a company when you experience an incident. And you oftentimes, however you do that first communication, will set the tone for having to walk things back or getting credit for how you handled it.
Absolutely. And that goes to a sound and pre-prepared incident response plan, right? Not just technical, but also have a communication plan ready to go. Good point. Thanks, Bob, for that.
Yeah, reminder for public service announcement, put 2-factor authentication on your internet sites.
Thanks. Okay, up next, Mike, our guest. You're pulling double duty, Mike. You have the Spotlight Talk and you have a hot topic. But your hot topic is red hot. You're talking about artificial intelligence being leveraged by the bad guys. Tell us about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you probably have to be somewhere on a remote island to have not heard about ChatGPT, and Google has Bard, and it's kind of the rage right now. And part of it is because AI's been out for a while and it's kind of clumsy and it's error prone, but along comes ChatGPT, and I'm sure a lot of you have played with it. I've played with it. It's scary in how good it is. It's, all these language, natural language processing, AI, they take tons and tons of data. They're able to quickly parse through it and provide answers almost real time. And the interesting thing here is, while we see a lot of benefit and a lot of use and a lot of potential for it on the good side, well, bad guys are always looking for how they can leverage technology to do bad things. And ChatGPT has come a little way since when it first came out. I remember probably the first couple of weeks it was out, I could easily go out there and say, hey, create a phishing email for me, or create a BEC email, or create a social engineer email. And it provides something that is very scary, very real, very, believable. And I would probably put it within the top 1% of best phishing emails, best BEC emails we see from our customers and from my experience. Now they've added, they pivot a little bit. They're able to, say, hey, that's something that's unethical. We're not going to do that. We're not going to help you out here. And it's easy like anything else with technology. You just kind of have to keep poking and you can eventually find the way through. Just today, I was able to say, well, write me an ethical BEC email. And it's like, okay, well, I'll do that. And it's the same BEC email. It's just now that I've couched it in the word ethical, it's to the AI, it's okay to do it.
Right.
And I think it's more of a novelty today, but I think what this really does from an attacker's perspective is today it's email. Today it's being able to craft more believable emails. But where are they going to go with this? Where are they going to go with AI and things like ChatGPT for AI-driven malware or the ability to evade and respond to defense? And so instead of a human behind a keyboard, if I can do this at scale with AI, when the blue team is blocking, I can continue to pivot. I can continue to respond. And it just makes it that much harder for us in security to defend against things that are now being driven at scale, being driven with automation, being driven in a way that's less human error prone. And so it's something that's coming up a lot. We're seeing it from attackers starting to leverage things like this, and probably not as scary today, but it's like, where's this going to lead 2 years from now, 5 years from now? How are bad guys going to figure out how to really harness the power of artificial intelligence for their own benefit?
Yeah. And being the first one out there from OpenAI, okay, it has some ethics behind it, but okay, Bard came out with Google has Bard, and there's a couple of others that are starting to pop up, and are they going to have the same ethics, or is it going to be open bar, or
It'll be regional? You can have different AIs depending on different jurisdictions, right?
That's right.
And I don't know if I have to revisit what I'm going to just tell you to build on what Mike said. But a team member told us a couple of weeks back, they asked ChatGPT to just hack an address, right? And obviously ChatGPT said, no, I can't do that. It's unethical. But then they rephrased the question. If I were to hack, how would I do it? And what tools would I use? And it shared the information. So it's almost like hacking as a service with a recipe. But this was 2 weeks ago. Maybe it's not here anymore. Maybe it's a task we should give ourselves to revalidate. But to your point around, ethical BEC, anything's almost possible now.
I've seen it where you just tell it, pretend you're a hacker.
That's right.
And it will get rid of all of its kind of guardrails.
That's right. The prompt has everything to do with it. Once people get a hang of the prompt, sky's the limit. What's going to happen?
So it's the art of the question, of asking the right question. That's
the art of the question.
New job description, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like there are many keys to unlock that door.
Thanks, Mike. That was good. Great hot topic, really red hot. We're going to move on to one last one. We were supposed to do 3, but then Bob did some overtime for the show. He submitted a second hot topic. And it's actually, when I read the title, I have it here. It was so sensational that I didn't believe it at first. So I'm hoping that it's clickbait. So Bob, the article in question, I'm just going to read the title. Cyber Apocalypse 2023. Is the world heading for a catastrophic event? Okay, now tell me this is clickbait, please.
It's clickbait.
Okay, thank God. There you go.
But let's go into it and let's break it down, because I think bringing back into context, I think everything we've already talked about today, there are some really interesting things to think about. And I will say to charge everyone listening and all of us to be very careful to not be sensationalistic about the threats that are out there. But it's going to be a changing world. We're going to have to stay on top of it, like always, right? Everything's changing pretty quickly, and add AI to the mix, it continues to change. So let me dive into this, because let's go to that term catastrophic. So it was at the World Economic Forum, and there was a forum managing director, Jeremy Jurgens, revealed 93% of those surveyed. Now, we don't know where they were from or anything. Believe that a catastrophic cybersecurity event is likely not in 2023, as it says, but in the next 2 years. Now, I'm going to skip to the end of the article, because this is where we have to stop using FUD, right? It says exactly what danger could be of a catastrophic attack as described in the World Economic Forum report. Those are difficult to predict. But the fact is, with so much of our business and private lives conducted online, they could be practically unlimited. And I think, let me boil that down to what it really means, and I think what they're saying. And there's 2 points I want to make. Number one, if you look at how interconnected and how online, Patrick, you talk about how everything is jumping. Everyone's jumping to get things in the cloud. Look at all the services, everything we do online. We're getting attacked as people. AI is now in the picture. What they're talking about is if there is a compromise and that uses an AI, right? I'll throw in, as you start talking about AI, one of the things that we're seeing in our third-party assessments that we're doing on behalf of clients now is a lot of people are using GitHub. Well, guess what? They're taking code from there, but GitHub also has their AI helper, and they're trying to start to tune their AI to say whether it's good code or bad code, but they're also leveraging their personnel to determine that and say, is this good code or bad code? Plus, we have our scanners still looking at it, hopefully. So we look at those processes. But at the intersection of that, the AI capability is unknown. What if I programmed it and my AI could see, oh, I got stopped here. Let me change it and go over here and try this over there. We don't know what kind of changes are going to happen, what implementations there are going to be. And I think that's what they're saying is interconnectedness, AIs, and as people, we're still on the hook. The intersection of those 3 things, there's still a lot of unknown out there, and that's what they're projecting. Now, secondarily, this is interesting because that might be the sensational route, right, of saying it's the unknown and it could be catastrophic. But look, we've all seen attacks on infrastructure. People can't get heat. Maybe it is. Maybe it could be, right? Balloons floating over our countries now. Secondarily, let's look at where things are. They predicted that it's going to be about $10 trillion this year in losses based on attacks. Well, that's not a big jump. But what they're saying is that hacking is now so commoditized that anybody can do it. So we're just going to see an increase of that. I think that's your minimum base case with the unknown upside.
Well, I mean,
so that's how I'm going to lay it out.
It's a potential perfect storm because the vulnerabilities are increasing at scale. There's AI in the mix. At the same time, people are transforming digitally at a faster rate. So the surface of attack is increasing exponentially at the same time as the threat landscape. That's what we're composing with. Because for the longest time, the threat landscape was of smaller scale. Yeah, the internet's been around for a long time, but not to the extent as it is today in all our business processes, our software supply chains, our interconnectedness, as you mentioned. So the potential is there, and the tools and vulnerabilities are increasing at the same rate.
And that's going to be the story going forward that we have to stay on top of because it's going to keep changing.
So you mentioned, Bob, 10 trillion, 10.5 trillion annually, increasing from 3 trillion in 2015. Which would be the 3rd largest GDP behind US and China. So
most of the time, those numbers are underestimated.
Yeah. Crime is supposed not to pay, but there you go.
Cloud adoption is much quicker than everyone thought.
Are you enjoying Behind the Shield? Enjoy it more without commercials. Watch us live without interruption by registering for our virtual event each month. Visit virtualguardian.com/event and check out what's planned for the next Behind the Shield. Remember, when you're behind the shield, you're ahead of the game.
Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you to the panel for all your insight, your inputs, the hot topics. Super interesting as usual. We're going to switch gears now to the second portion of the show. And we're going to hand the microphone over to our spotlight speaker, Mike Britton, CISO at Abnormal Security. Mike, you tell us a little bit about yourself. And then seeing as you brought a guest with you, I'll let you introduce him. And then you guys can take it away with your talk for the next 20 minutes. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Marco. So like Marco mentioned, I'm Mike Britton. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Abnormal Security. spent about 26 years in security, compliance, IT, mostly large Fortune 500 companies. My last gig was the CISO for Alliance Data, which was a financial services company. And to all my Canadian friends, we also owned the Air Miles reward program. So I'm very familiar with the Canadian marketplace, and spent lots of time up in Toronto and Canada. So I ended up at Abnormal partially because I was an early customer of Abnormal's, and I was looking for something better to solve problems around email security. I got to meet Abnormal in late 2019, early 2020. Loved the product, saw firsthand what a difference it made for me and my organization and protecting us from some of these exact same type of things we've talked about in the hot topics. And because of where Abnormal was going and their founders and their vision, I took a job with them in early 2021 to run their security and privacy program. So Abnormal, like was mentioned, we are a email security platform. We focus primarily on Office 365 and Google Workspace, that whole journey to the cloud. Everybody's using cloud-hosted email today. What makes us different from your secure email gateway is that we plug in through API, and we use artificial intelligence to really ferret out and uncover what's normal versus abnormal, and some of those things like the Reddit hack, where we're extremely effective at stopping account takeovers and social engineered attacks. And that's, really enough about me. The real star of the show here is Joel. He's from PCL Construction. And Joel, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I manage the cybersecurity and networking teams here at PCL. I've been doing network security and cybersecurity for close to 20 years now, always at PCL. So I've really kind of been able to see right from the very beginning our journey of not taking security too seriously to now where we're at now, which is trying to keep the bad guys out. So
very good. So just to start our conversation, we often hear about ransomware. Ransomware is kind of the ugly type of incident that hits the news. It causes our board to ask questions. It's on the Wall Street Journal. It's on the newspapers. And all at the same time, while I'm not minimizing the impact of ransomware, it's really the little brother to business email compromise and social engineered attack that cost multiple billions of dollars a year in direct losses. Joel, you've been at PCL for many years. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Business email compromise has been the number one vector that we've been working to prevent for the last several years. For sure, it's definitely what my SOC analysts are spending the most time on. For sure, not ransomware.
And when it comes to some of those social engineering attacks, what are some of the common ones that you're seeing? Maybe give some examples.
Yeah, I mean it's all the ones we're very familiar with, right? You get the executive impersonations. So this one is usually done just through spoofing. Because if you got a compromised executive, you got some big problems on your hand. So we've done things like DKIM, DMARC, SPF, all that kind of good stuff, and that certainly helps with the spoofing. Those ones are usually fairly easy to catch. Those ones aren't really a huge concern for me anymore, to be honest. We get a lot of typo squatting, right? So these come in multiple forms that you have to deal with. So the first one is where you get somebody registering a domain from one of our subcontractors or a partner or a third party. And then they're trying to, send us emails from that domain and trying to get us to change bank account information or click a link to grab credentials, anything like that. Those are extremely common. Then you get, the typo squatting where they're trying to grab a PCL domain, right? So something that's close to our PCL.com. And so in that particular case, then they're spoofing PCL and they're sending emails to our subs and to our partners and that sort of thing. And again, those are mostly just trying to get them to change bank account information and that sort of stuff. Again, extremely common. We're always getting partners report those back to us. Hey, is this your real email address? And 99% of the time it's not. Right. So those are harder to deal with because we're not in control of those. And so that's where it's really, you have to have good partners and where they're doing their diligence on their side as well, right? It's everybody has a little bit of a part to do when it comes to the email security. Credential phishing and changing bank account information are really the two big things that we see people trying to do when they're sending and receiving these emails. So
yeah, I can definitely relate to those just from the countless stories I hear from other security executives across all industries, and just from my own personal experience of dealing with email security for probably the last decade. To me too, like on the far end of the spectrum, and I used to deal with this prior to having Abnormal in place at my last job, is vendor security, supplier risk is, all things aren't equal. You can ask great questions. You can look at SOC 2 reports. You can do all sorts of things to do due diligence. But at the end of the day, the large, massive suppliers like the Microsofts and Amazons and IBMs of the world, they're generally, top notch in security. They put a lot of time and effort, but that doesn't mean that those are the only vendors you deal with. And what I had trouble with was some of the smaller vendors that we still spend a lot of money with, but they didn't have a fancy security team. They didn't have a lot of IT folks. They probably had one person that did it all. And when they would get an account takeover, because maybe 90% of their users were behind MFA, but not all of them. And when you get that bad guy sitting behind a legitimate email that your team, your accounts payable, your HR team deals with legitimately on a regular basis, all the things that you train and teach and the awareness kind of all goes out the window because it doesn't have any of those signs of, hey, this is a typo squat, this is a spoof. These are, it's a real email from a real business, a real email address that you do business with. And so those are some of the very difficult ones to deal with. And I think the other piece to me that's interesting is I always focused on reporting. So reporting is always the key. Like we mentioned in the Reddit hack, the individual raised their hand quickly and the Reddit security team was able to respond, and time is of the essence. And I always wanted my users to quickly click the phish reporting button. But the reality of it is, and we even have some research, and I can verify this from firsthand experience from years past, only about 2% of all attacks, someone reported it to the SOC. It was, someone clicked that phishing, someone correctly identified it. Why do you think that happens? Why do you think reporting is kind of an afterthought or it's not done frequently? And is it that users just really can't tell that these are attacks, or there's some other things behind that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big piece of it. Like you mentioned, these are like the really good email compromises that are happening now they're trusted people. They're people that you're expecting email from, and the conversations are getting hijacked, mid conversation. These aren't like net new conversations where you're not expecting something from this person, right? They're emails that are coming in and they're on topic, written really well. We were talking about the Chat GPT earlier. Like, I'm not convinced that some of these things that I'm seeing aren't being generated from some of these tools that are now available because they're just written so well. And it's so I think you're right in that they're just so hard to detect that it's actually a phishing message. That you just, the technology needs to take over. I think from you just can't rely on an end user to report. It certainly helps, but the technology needs to be there.
Absolutely. And then on the flip side, you're successful and you get people to report things, and it's almost like you're punished for the success of your awareness of getting to people to report things, because now all of a sudden your team is inundated with hundreds, if not thousands of reported fish. And I had a lot of automation behind mine, but it still did not remove all the manual tasks of my SOC having to go and reach out to individuals to do research, to find out, to look at, analyze email message headers and all the things that were required. And when it's 400 or 500 a week, that's a lot of time and effort. And your SOC is taken away from doing probably more important things. And the reality of it is, at the end of the day, they go and analyze those 400 or 500 mail messages a week, and you find out that over 80% of them are actually safe. They're legitimate emails. I can't tell you how many times I would see somebody report something and I'm like, that came from another user within the company. Well, what made you think that was? I wanted to be sure. Security is always telling me, if in doubt, click. And the reality of it is, it's good that they report it, but at the same time, it's causing two problems. It's causing a burden on the security teams having to spend time. It's the same problem, shortage of security talent and budgets under pressure. And now I'm having to, balance between, do I go triage 500 email messages, or do I look for other bigger fish to fry from an alert perspective? And my end user, well, they're not doing their job because they're waiting for security to come back and tell them, is that a good email or not? And so they may be delaying payments or whatever the situation might be. And it creates this kind of conundrum for us of, darned if you do, darned if you don't. And really, I think it's important to be able to automate these. I think it's important to really, with all of the pressures we all face in all businesses, but security especially, just being able to automate with a high degree of efficacy, to be able to automate and really take that burden off your team and really get your users back to working. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I mean, you're exactly right in that we've got, really talented SOC analysts sitting here looking at emails all day, right? That's not what we want. That's a waste of talent sitting there doing that kind of work all day. I'd rather have them working on other things, right? So exactly right on that. And then automation is key. We've got a number of things that we do, right? So when a user does report a fish, my team doesn't actually look at that. It gets analyzed automatically via abnormal, and it can respond back and to the end user and just say this is fine, or it's malicious, and automatically remove it. It's a nice feedback loop where it just takes away a lot of the work, tedious work that we were having to do in the past.
Well, and I think that's important too, because as a end user, if I submit something, I want that feedback to say, yes, that was a bad email. Thanks for reporting it. We've taken care of. Or I want that feedback to say, oh, it's all safe. Go about your work. And that's the hard thing. Without that level of automation, and once again, I'm adding burden on my SOC to go ahead and manually email people to say, oh, it's good. Nope, it's bad. And it gives that kind of that closed loop feedback to the end user to kind of let them know what happened, and that they didn't just click a fish reporting button and they never heard back, and so on and so forth.
And that the accuracy is really important there too, right? Like, you don't want to get into a situation where somebody reports something malicious and the automation comes back and says, no, it's all good, click away, and it actually is malicious. So, having your false positive rate, your false negative rates being really high is extremely important there.
Absolutely.
Is your company digitally resilient? 75% of small businesses have no disaster recovery plan, and backup copies do not guarantee an organization's ability to get back to business. For more than 25 years, ESI Technologies has specialized in IT continuity, reducing financial and operational impacts for our clients. Learn more about digital resilience from ESI's experts at esitechnologies.com.
So as I mentioned in my intro, I implemented Abnormal at my previous company, and it was one of these things that It was a super easy thing to do. It took me less than 30 seconds to put it in. I didn't have to go make any risky changes within my environment. I didn't have to change my mail flow or risk my CEO not being able to get their email. And part of the reason why I joined Abnormal, it was twofold. It was one, I saw what the solution they were providing, and it's a crowded market in cybersecurity. There's a lot of good solutions, and there's a lot of solutions that don't live up to the billing. And being able to see really firsthand, this is what this company does, this is what the solution does. That was, the first box I checked. But really, the second box was the vision of the two founders. They didn't come from cybersecurity; they came from ad tech and data science. And they had a bigger vision than just email security. They wanted to start with email security because it's such a massive problem, but they wanted to take that same data science approach that's very successful in ad tech, and they wanted to apply it to really the broader security landscape in general. And email security was a great place to start. And while this is definitely not a sales pitch for Abnormal, that's not Joel's. Joel is not going to give a sales pitch either, but I thought, part of the reason of having Joel here was hearing from a customer firsthand and chatting a little bit about your experience with Abnormal as a company. What's it been like working with Abnormal?
Yeah, first, I'd just say it's been really smooth. Like, just to echo your comments, we did the POC and like you said, it was like 30 seconds, and it was in monitor mode, looking at all of the things going on and finding the bad stuff almost immediately. So that was awesome. And in general, it's been pretty easy to work with. I mean, SOC analysts are in there now every day doing what they do. So
excellent. Joel, thanks so much for sharing your experience. And I'm definitely pleased to hear that it's been a good one so far. And I'm going to hand it back over to Marco and the team to wrap everything up. But Joel and I will be sticking around for questions.
Excellent. That was great, guys. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. I don't know if Patrick or Bob had anything to add, any comments. I'm going to look.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Pat.
I'll venture a thought. I mean, if people think our email is not being monitored and our data flows and communication flows are not being monitored, you're mistaken. I mean, just a case that happened to me specifically 2 weeks ago. I got a document that I needed to sign through DocuSign. And as you know, when you complete the signatures, you get an email that says completed and executed. Well, guess what? I'm sending my DocuSign. I didn't get the counterparty signed yet, and I hadn't signed. And in my anti-spam and hidden there in the corner, I had the executed document notice, saying that I was just using DocuSign 2 minutes ago, right? I could have just gone and clicked. So it was captured. But just to say, someone knew, or an AI knew, that I was working within DocuSign and I was executing a contract. And within minutes, I was spammed and potentially spoofed. So we are constantly being monitored, and this is critical.
For anybody doing the mock phishing test messages that they send out to their organizations, I always find that the DocuSign ones are really effective at catching people.
Really?
I did validate, and it wasn't our team.
Interesting.
Because they run tests all the time.
Duly noted. Never used that one, but duly noted. It's upsetting. Joel. Very good.
Well, and it makes it even more challenging just because we all live on our phones these days, and in an effort to minimize and make it a pleasurable experience of email on phone, they hide a lot of things. You don't necessarily see the email, you see the display name. And
that's right.
We're all distracted. We're all busy. Got 8,000 things going on. I'm expecting the Amazon delivery guy to show up. I'm expecting this DocuSign to come into my mailbox. We live in a very cluttered and fast-paced world. And part of that's probably COVID, and part of that's just everybody's digital. And so it makes us distracted.
The other thing, people need to consider as well is, if you think that, business email compromise or fraud is covered by your cyber insurance or insurance, you're mistaken. One of the reasons why they're making so much money in these compromises is that, typically if you have an incident, you get a deductible based on one incident. these guys are attacking, your payables that are spread across a few businesses, a few cities, a bunch of employees. Each incident cannot be claimed separately, right? Sorry, you have to claim it separately. And most of the time, these frauds are, $50,000, $100,000, and you'll end up being below your deductible. So no one's going to go and claim. So you're bleeding money, and at the same time, you can't really claim anything because you don't pass that mark. Contrary to a ransomware attack, where it's a big bang, it's extremely painful and disruptive. Obviously the coverages are reducing now, and the premiums are increasing, but you could still claim it against your cyber insurance company because deductible, the impact is much higher than your deductible. So be aware of that and look at the fine print of your various cyber insurance policies.
Well, and don't expect your insurance carrier to also come through and validate that you had MFA on 100% of your users, that you were doing all of the right things and
EDR, everything else, right?
Mike, I forget if it was Mike or Joel. You mentioned that 2% of attacks are being reported by users. Why is that? Is it just like lack of awareness? They weren't informed? What's
shame?
I think it's a little bit of all. I think we are. We've all become wary of it. Yes, I expect to see these things, and so I'm not going to click on it, but why should I report it? It was always fascinating to me because that's one of the neat things about abnormal is I can kind of see when someone does report something, if it went to 10 different people, I can also see what the other 10 did. And I can see that some read it and replied and never reported it. I can see that some deleted it, and I can see that some just left it in their inbox unread. And it's always kind of a fascinating, study and understanding, well, you saw this, you read it, why didn't you report it? Or you saw this and deleted it, why didn't you report it? And sometimes it's interesting to kind of drive into kind of getting behind the psychology of why you didn't take an action. And I think honestly, it's just we get so many of them. The ones that are easy, we just say, someone else will report it, or maybe my security team is trying to test me and I don't want to fall bait for it. And I think there's a variety of reasons.
I see. And another thing that came to mind was so you got your phishing, your vishing, and your smishing. So text message, when it's once a year, at least when it's time for tax season, which is right around the corner here in Canada, you get these smishing, these fake SMSs, text messages. Is it applicable? Does Abnormal do anything for that or no?
I would love to, because it hits my users too. They get fake, CEO texts all the time, and that's a little bit harder problem to solve at this point. But at the end of the day, we do want to stop those type of attacks from hitting your modern SaaS workforce. If you're using Slack or Teams or Office 365, we want to protect you there. And so we do have the visibility. We do have the technology to prevent the account takeover, to prevent the social engineering attacks there. And what you'll see as we continue to mature as a company, we'll see that expanding to other things like Salesforce and other areas where we have collaboration and messaging and business taking place.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. I'm checking the chat. There is one comment. Let me just scroll up here. Comes from Paul L. But it's concerning. It's another attack that happened. It didn't make our hot topics this week, but let's see if the panel has any comments on this. Is it too commonplace already to mention? I thought a hot topic would be the attack on Indigo Canada. Indigo, Canada's biggest bookseller, resulting in the complete shutdown of their online sales platform, down for over a week at this point. So just before the panel, as a matter of fact, just before this call, I went to Indigo, which there's an Indigo right near the office, and I was there, and it was bustling. It was people everywhere. It was super busy, but that was in store. Now, I wasn't aware that the site was down.
Well, you couldn't even transact in store with credit cards for a good chunk of the week.
Oh, really?
I found out I reserved. So Chris Hadfield, our Canadian astronaut, is writing mystery books and murder mystery books, and I reserved one of his books, the second book that's coming out in the fall. And I go to this site. I had the choice between Indigo and Amazon, and I want to encourage a Canadian company there. So I go to Indigo, and that's how I found out that they were down. So I ended up transacting with Amazon. But listen, what more is there to say? They're a big, Canadian, very visible Canadian company. We had to choose between stories. I didn't study this one. I just thought it was just another, another public hack and whatnot. Or it is clearly more of a ransomware attack. I wanted to focus on the identity theft, and there was a lot of different case and examples in the mortgage broker company. You got to make choices.
Our crown jewels,
but I didn't study it, so I can't give you all the details.
Our Canadian crown jewels are being attacked. I think last behind the shield was Sobeys. And now, or two behind the shields ago, it was Sobeys. And
that one was worse, I think, Sobeys, because it also affected all the supply chain. The store, the grocery stores, they had empty shelves.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, it was the pharmacies. The pharmacies were also very
now
affected.
The bookshelves are full because you can't sell them. It's a bit different.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. I'm looking in the chat. That's the only questions I have here. The only comments. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. We're ending the end of the show. It says go to Q&A. Hold on a second here. I got a message in my ear from Master Control.
You got to go to the other.
I'm in the wrong place. Here we go. Sorry about that. Maxim is asking, what is your feedback to date on how effective and how fast Quebec companies are complying with Law 25? What are their main difficulties?
Well, I'll take that because our GRC team is in the middle of it. We're doing a lot of work with companies that are complying to the law. The biggest issue, I think, is people don't understand the roadmap and what is required, because the compliance requirements are over a period of 3 years, and there's different requirements every year. So in September 2022 is the first milestone, and then you have 3 years following that. Some people still can't spell Law 25. Some people don't know they have to comply. Obviously, if you're a Canadian company, you need to operate in Quebec to be able to be subject to the law. If you're outside of Quebec, unless a Quebec company is also dealing with a third party outside of the country, even then they have to be compliant. So any companies in Quebec that have data center consumption or applications that are running outside of province have to comply. So third party is critical in the law. People are moving slowly. Some of them are in advance, others not. So I guess it's a mixed bag. Like everything, these things take time. But I think a lot of companies are on the right track. I think the biggest milestone is the one that's coming up in September of this year. There's a lot more things to comply that are more complicated. The right to be forgotten, the ability to have, require that all the information that an organization has on you, it has to be disclosed. There's a lot of things happening. Bob, did you want to chime in?
Actually, Pat, we have 1 more minute left. I want to get to this last attendee question. This one is from an anonymous attendee. I've heard from cyber insurance folks that social engineering is the most common claim they see. However, people really only mention ransomware. Bob, did you want to take that one, field that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I think social engineering, right? The human weakness is the most common one. So business email compromise, and I think Patrick mentioned it, and I think we talked about it on our last Behind the Shield. Whether you get in and have a business email compromise, which we said keep it under the radar, but it adds up to a big amount, and that's kind of the way they do it. Or it ends up in something where they drop something and it ends up in a ransomware attack. The ransomware attack always gets more coverage because while there are fewer incidents, they're bigger dollar. I think on average, $1.5 million. So that's why you see it. I think it's more sensationalized while, the business email compromise, also from a social engineering attack, is so much more common. It's just doesn't have the gaudy numbers of a ransomware attack.
Well, I think the other thing too is when you had something like Colonial Pipeline and the whole eastern seaboard of the U.S. was shut down from gas, it's kind of hard to hide that. If I pay $100,000 fake invoice, that's not a reportable thing. It's not a breach, so I'm embarrassed. And so I'm not going to go raise my hand and say, oops, I fell for the bait there.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Thank you very much for your comments and your answers. That was the last audience participation question. So thank you everybody for participating. If you missed any part of today's event, today's show will be made available on most popular podcast services sometime next week. So look out for that. You can also go to virtualguardian.com/event to listen to previous podcasts. Before I sign off, I want to thank today's Behind the Shield Spotlight sponsor, Abnormal Security. Big thank you to Mike, Joel. Thank you very much for your talk. Super interesting.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Our panelists, Bob Bennett and Patrick Noon, for all of their regular, usual insights.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Quick shout out to Jennifer Odo at Master Control. She makes sure that the show runs smoothly and that we all look good. So thanks, Jen, wherever you are. I hope to see you next week, everybody, where Ping will be our spotlight guest. So that's going to be cool. And to all you out there listening in, we really appreciate your support. Without you, there will be probably no podcast here. So very grateful for your presence. And as always, remember, when you're behind the shield, you're ahead of the game. Take care, everybody.